Okay, when you look at the colonial policies, and we're still implementing those today. And every organization that we have, including the political governing structures and organizations of our government, institutions, and so on, most of them are incorporated under provincial corporate law. And when you do that, you have no powers of governing. Compromise your powers of governing. You're now just a corporate entity like any other business. But under provincial law and jurisdiction, then you're required to implement provincial law and jurisdiction over education. When that constitutional framework that governs Crown Indian Nations relations provides for the federal government's legal, fiscal, jurisdictional responsibility. And what most people don't know now, see, many of the people that you represent, whether they're Indian or Métis or non-status Indians, whatever, they're all recognized constitutionally, not just under the Indian Act or the treaties. They're recognized as having constitutional status as Indians, Métis, and Inuit. Now, it doesn't say a non-reserve or off-reserve Indian. And when you look at Section 35, 1, it provides for the portability of your rights and your status. In what form? The form of your sovereignty. Each one of you have sovereignty status, and collectively you have sovereignty status. Your nation has sovereignty status, but we don't go there. And it has the portability of your inherent rights. Inherent rights by sector, for education, health, social development, justice, economics. Your inherent rights to self-determination, exercising your powers of governing that are internal, external, and international powers of government. It recognizes your national powers of treaty making. Now you see, how do they deduct your status under the Indian Act from the recognition by those that are affected by the treaties that exist? They're international treaties, where they recognize your government having jurisdiction to control citizenship and membership under their laws and government and jurisdiction. But what about your status, your membership under Section 35(1)? That's a constitutional recognition of your status, not an Indian Act membership recognition. And what form of status is that under the Constitution? Well, for me, I give them examples. I'm a Cree from Chegasté-Patient. Chegasté-Patient is a band of the Cree Nation. We form a political unit in the community of the Cree Nation. Under our own Chegasté-Patient Cree Citizenship Act and Membership Code, Saul Sanderson will be registered under that authority and that jurisdiction. But look at recognizing all of Saul Sanderson's inherent rights, treaty and treaty rights. But Section 35 does the same recognition now. And the federal government has capacity to not only recognize our treaties, our inherent rights, title to lands and resources, it recognizes our constitutional powers of governing. Parliament and the federal government now can legislate complementary laws recognizing our powers of governing. Now you see, all those policies, like the Indian Act policies, they're all based on Section 9124 of the BNA Act. But the majority of those policies are based on all those colonial policies that I highlighted for you, that they have put in place over the last 500 years. And we're not dealing with that issue. When you go back to the Constitution of Canada, Section 35(2), it recognizes the status of Indians, Métis, and Inuit in their constitutional capacity. And what form of recognition is that? Well, Saul Sanderson is recognized and registered as a Cree under the Cree Citizenship Act and Membership Code of the Cree Nation of Chegasté-Patient Band. That's a member of the Cree Nation. So by recognition under Section 35(1), 35(2) as Indian provides for dual citizenship status as a Canadian with full benefits. So they want to do away with the Indian Act. Well, how do they do away with the Indian Act when they have to keep a registry of Indians, Métis and Inuit? I told them, look, you're going to have to amend your Citizenship Act, another part to it, where it clearly identifies your recognition of our status, our rights, our full benefits under that amendment to the Citizenship Act, and you'll recognize Saul Sanderson Indian status under the Cree Nations Citizenship Act of Chickasha Nation. So that's some of the kinds of issues we don't deal with, you see. We keep reacting to Bill C-31, keep reacting to the Indian Act, registration and policy. So what they're doing now, to accommodate their registration of 6-1, 6-2, 6-3, and so on, after 6-2, Indians are being registered under the Indian Act in two categories. One category, Indians are recognized with full benefits and rights recognized. The other category, they're recognized as Indians, registered as Indians, with no benefits or status. Now that's the people that you're representing in terms of your organization. And many of our own chiefs and councils don't realize that right in their own bands right now, they're allowing the feds to terminate the status of our own people under that Bill C-31 piece of legislation. When that was passed, the late David Enique happened to be sitting at the table, constitutional table with me, representing AFN. And Trudeau called for a vote at that table of all the premiers and the organizations to accept Bill C-31. Everybody stood up. We didn't. And when they sat down, all those premiers cleared their seats, and Native women took over those seats and sat there taking shots at me and David Enique for rejecting Bill C-31. But nobody asked us why. So all Bill C-31 does is give you Indian status. It does not recognize your benefits and your rights. But yet we keep promoting and implementing that Bill C-31 document. And the lady that went to the UN and won the court case, won the support from the UN, terminate and get recognition for the women's rights and status, she came back and supported Bill C-31. Stuff that she rejected when she went there. You see, we need to look at how we move ahead with our implementation of our inherent rights by sector, our sovereignty of our governments, rights to lands and resources. And that's a collective responsibility that we should be looking at, how we move forward with it. And I tell the Métis people, you can't lose sight of your Indian heritage. If you don't implement and enforce that, and you've lost all your inherent rights, because they're tied to our ancestry and traditional status. Now, the other thing that they done, church and the government, had our status inheritance inherited from the male side of the family. Traditionally, all our status is inherited from the female side of the family. So we need to reinstate that. Because again, some of the people you're representing now, the organization has capacity to recognize, they were registered in that way, or not registered at all in some cases. But they're still Indian or Métis. Now, many logistical issues that have to be addressed. And when we look at UNDRIP, you're entitled to all the recognition that's there in UNDRIP. Now we have our own people refusing to recognize the federal jurisdiction to implement UNDRIP. So we have to have our own strategy and own plans and strategies and laws to implement UNDRIP. So how do we do that? I was asked the other day on a conference call with chiefs here. And I said, look, that's easy enough for us to do. We say we're sovereign, we have governments, we have jurisdiction laws, well, we have inherent rights, we have inherent sovereignty, we have inherent title to lands and resources. You need to list them and you define them using your own philosophy and worldview based on your traditions, customs, practices, beliefs, and values. Now, along with each of those inherent rights that you'll see listed on one of the videos, there's duties and responsibilities that we have collectively for all those inherent rights, including our inherent sovereignty. What are they? We don't teach them anymore. And when we look at that and that strategy and we know what that duty and responsibilities are collectively, then what are the plans and strategies do we have to implement them in every sector? And we have that. What are the unique and special laws, forms of law do we need to give them legal effect and enforcement? So all that I just described to you is what we leave up to the governments federally and provincially to define and implement. We don't like what they're doing. Well, if we don't like what they're doing, then we better get our act together to identify what and how we have to do it ourselves under our own government's jurisdiction law. Now, your organization again falls between the cracks in terms of determining your status of having jurisdiction and government. But you have an organization that's structured administratively right now. You need to move to a political organizational structure that forms your government of your organization. And that can be done collectively. Now, when I talk about the collective rights and status of Indians under inherent rights, then that is something that flies in the face of the government's policy of human rights. Human rights only recognizes individual rights. That's man-made law. And I pointed out to Jody Wilson, the Minister of Justice, when she first got appointed. I met her here in Saskatoon. And I said, look, no government has ever recognized inherent rights of our people. I said, but that's who you and I are. So I described to her the same stuff I just identified with you and that you'll see on some of the other videos. And she said, and I told her, look, inherent rights are granted by the Creator of our nations and peoples. They come from nowhere else. But you keep using the term indigenous rights, aboriginal rights, human rights. And of course, now we have treaties, so we have treaty rights. But you see, when we had negotiated the national powers of treaty making, how did we do that? Well, all the inherent sovereignty, inherent rights by sector, and inherent titles to lands and resources that are reserved, recognized, confirmed, and guaranteed by treaty making and the treaties. So we see bans, for example, looking at reserved lands by ban. Well, there's all those other lands that are recognized and reserved by treaty making that we don't implement. Now, again, Métis people have treaties, and they're party to, they adhered to Treaty 3. And they had 2 treaties in Isle La Crosse and that area here in Saskatchewan. So lots of homework to be done by your organization and your people, but you're not alone. As Indians are not doing it, Métis are not doing it, Inuit are not doing it. Why? That's our responsibility to get that done. So when we get to talking about jurisdiction and law, see, we can meet and talk about programs, services, but we never go to the discussions on how we implement our own jurisdictional law that will result in interface of jurisdictional law between our governments, between our people, especially where it applies to traditional lands and resource territory. Now in BC, the federal government signed an agreement with BC government, the Chief Summit, and one of the principles they have right at the front is they recognize the sovereignty of those nations. The second principle is they recognize the inherent title of those nations to their lands and resources. Now that's what we have treaties for, and that's what we have inherent rights for. That basically reinforces what you saw on that video in terms of how they terminated all what I just talked about through those colonial policies. And those policies are being implemented now, today, in terms of those devolution plans and strategies through the corporate entities like the education authorities, health authorities, you name it, child welfare authorities. They're all under provincial law and jurisdiction. When we should be legislating the field ourselves and occupying the field with our own laws and jurisdiction. So many of the people that you're representing are affected by the lack of dealing fully with citizenship status and membership rights, just in terms of their identity, because of those policies that are no longer valid, that were used to terminate your status of your people. So now what I'm talking about here and what I gave to you is a political agenda, and we keep reacting to administrative agendas. So I'll stop there for now.